And on behalf of the OPC, I'm delighted to welcome you to this screening of The Perfect Story, a film by filmmaker Michelle Shephard, produced by Frequent Flyer Productions with the National Film Board of Canada. We're also thrilled to have Michelle with us this evening for Q&A after the event, after the screening. So please look forward to that. It will be held with Anna Mela Papernay, and we welcome you to the show. So please enjoy the film. Thank you so much.
It's not the film we set out to make. We were talking about this earlier, and we don't really go into that in the film, but we started out, he just wanted to go back to Somalia, and he asked if I would record it. And we'd been talking stayed friends over the years, and I was starting to move a little bit from newspapers into filmmaking more. And so he had said, listen, someday I want to go back once I get my citizenship. Let's make a documentary together. And I thought that was a great idea. So that was the film we were making. I had no intention of being in the film as much as I was. I could definitely say it'll be the only time I'm on that side of the camera ever in a film again. But as you saw in the film, what happened was when he went back to Mogadishu, he kind of had this epiphany and this moment. And then it became, and we can get into all these questions, but then it became really a challenge, ethically, morally. Do we continue with this film? If we do, what does it become? And all the while making sure he was okay, trying to give him as much agency to tell his own story. And in the end, he agreed to keep going. He decided that this was the way he wanted to correct the record. And then the film changed. Then it became a film about journalism, because it was no longer sort of about our relationship or his story as much. It was about what do we do in journalism? How do we tell stories? Are we storytellers or are we story takers? And it was really uncomfortable. I mean, it was probably about 5 years making that, and a lot of starts and stops, and not sure we were doing the right thing with it. So it is one of those films that it makes you uncomfortable. And I always say this when it showed at Hot Docs, and sort of at the beginning, I was like, well, welcome, thank you. This is going to be hard to watch, which is a weird thing to say when you start a film. But I want people to kind of feel uncomfortable. I want people to have questions and leave and talk more about it.
What made you decide to do that? It's hard to turn the camera on yourself as a reporter.
Yeah, well, I think I felt like I had a responsibility, though, really, because, that's what we do in journalism. We always ask people to tell their stories to us and to give us that trust. So I think in this sense, it really made me question how much I was a part of him telling this story. And it made me question, in general, what we do, especially when you're a foreign correspondent, and especially the type of foreign correspondent that I was. When I was at the Star, I was their national security correspondent, but I was always based in Toronto. So I would just go in and out for various periods. And that was often called sort of parachute jumping, which is a derogatory term really for journalism. And I get why it is, and it can be. I like to think, and I'm not sure I always did it well, but I tried. I like to think that what I was doing was because I understood my beat so well, that I would be going to places and I would understand the context of those stories. And so much of what I did in national security was about policy and what happened after 9/11 and all those policies. So at bigger papers, you would have the Washington people reporting about, let's say, drone attacks. And then you'd have maybe someone in the Yemen bureau reporting about that. I got to see both sides, so I got to go to, Washington and see the debate about that policy that came in. But then I also got to go to Yemen and see what happens when a drone hits a wedding party instead of an intended target. So for me, I thought it worked. But certainly this story made me challenge a lot of what we did. And I felt, ultimately, I just felt so sad for him because he was so smart. Like he was right. If he told me the truth right off the bat, I still would have done the story. Absolutely. It was barbaric what happened to him. But would the fallout have been the same? Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure there would have been that, movement to try and quote unquote rescue him, because he would have said, he was a thief, and he still deserves all the empathy he got and all the support he got. Absolutely. But would he have? I'm not sure.
so many of the stories that we tell are by their nature really messy. They're really complicated. But what do you do about sort of this inclination, whether it's conscious or not, to gravitate towards, the perfect story, to gravitate towards that sort of simplicity of narrative?
Well, and that's where I had to look at myself, and that's what the conversations I'm hoping it sparks about this, because we met actually first time reporting from Guantanamo Bay, and when you were with the Globe and I was with the Star. So talk about a complicated story, right there. I spent many years. I did another documentary on the Omar Khadr story. Many years reporting on that. That was a messy story. I mean, every time I report anything on that, I get like people enraged on both sides. And I liked that. And I thought, well, but it is complicated because it's not a tidy narrative. And most of the stories out of Guantanamo were like that. But I think after, almost 20 years of doing that, it's exhausting. There is a part of you that really likes that kind of Hollywood tidy narrative. So I think it's a hard question to answer. How do you not do that? I think just being aware that you're drawn to those stories makes you maybe, question things or not look for them in the same way. Not simplify stories.
You have to almost be like withholding, not just from yourself, but from audiences and from editors often. Like you can tell that there's a desire in you as well as everyone else for things to be neat and tidy.
Totally.
And you have to remind yourself that actually it's not.
Totally. I mean, would I have gotten the same play in this story, if it'd been a little bit different? Maybe not, maybe not the front of the insight section, or we know that all the time, that editors will kind of be like, oh, that's unfortunate about this. Or I remember one terrible case after 9/11. I was in New York covering 9/11, and there was a Canadian widow there. Her husband had died in the towers, and she was a lovely woman. It was 5 days later, I think it was. She was pregnant. She was leaving, and she was one of the people who still were hopeful that their relatives were alive. And she gave us this beautiful interview, and she's like, "Now I need to get home to my toddler. I know he's not there." And so it's a very brave, sort of moving story. And an editor calling saying, like, "Why isn't she crying in the picture?" And she's like, "Because she didn't cry." It's like, well, can you go back? This is terrible. I won't say who the editor was, but I mean, the story didn't go up it wasn't the front page because you didn't have the crying widow. So I mean, those decisions get made, right? And so I think as journalists who are actually out in the field, you have to always stay true to what it is. But there is this, as you say, this preference for that's why we called it the perfect story.
Do you think what do we do about the ways we're complicit in romanticizing places like Somali and Mogadishu, stories like Ismail's?
Yeah, again, this is the discomfort. And, I wrote a companion piece that went with this film that I always kind of hope people read, because there's only so much you can see in the film, so much you always need some, something visual to show. I already editorialized a lot in it, but yeah, I mean, that's what made me feel sick about it a little bit. Like, I was like, oh God, this sounds like smacks of sort of white saviorism. And did, I turn him into this perfect victim because that's what people need to see? It's just this gross kind of caricature of what somebody of a victim of war looks like. Again, I think it's just always keeping in check your lens that you look at. I'd like to think over the span of career, that's not what I did. And certainly what I think, there's a lot of amazing work that's being done in the field by experienced foreign correspondents, but it's something you definitely have to always keep in check. Absolutely.